I'm now going to be handing over to Ben from the Youth Endowment Fund, who's going to fully describe to us and start to promote our evidence-based practice within our education settings, but also describe a toolkit that we can all use and facilitate to really drive that discussion on what can we do locally, what is our best practice, what's currently working for us, and what do we identify as areas that we can collaboratively work together to improve. Thanks, Ben.
Hi all, thanks so much. I'm just gonna just go through the classic moment of hoping my screen share works. So my name is Ben O'Reilly. I work at the Youth Endowment Fund. So I just wanted to briefly introduce you to us as an organisation, introduce you to the Education Practice Guidance Report that we published in May of 2024. And then, as Nadine said, to touch on the EPIC self-assessment tool. Just to briefly introduce you to us as an organisation, in case you haven't come across this before, we are considered a What Works Centre. So we are focused on finding out what works to prevent children becoming involved in violence. And to do that, we're kind of hoping to build a movement to put that knowledge of evidence into practice. I have a very complicated strategy slide that we're always encouraged to share. But just to briefly introduce you to us as an organisation, on the left, you can see the 7 essential sectors that we work in. So we don't just work in education, we work across children's services, health, neighbourhoods, policing, youth justice, youth sector. And if you were to split our work into a couple of categories, it would be the 3 boxes at the top that you see. So on the left hand side, the blue box is representative of the funding that we do as an organisation. So we fund a lot of research projects and a lot of programmes. Primarily for the past 5 years, we've been focused on evidence gaps. So where we know that there's a gap in evidence, we funded projects to run randomized control trials to really understand if interventions that we think work do robustly work, and the evidence does indicate that they're effective in preventing involvement in violence. The middle box, the yellow box, is around the dissemination of what works. So we know that specific things are more effective than others, and we have created a YEF toolkit where all of that is represented. That's available on our website for free, and we have kind of that's probably like our flagship resource. But we do also put out practice guidance reports for the 7 key sectors for practitioners working in those sectors. I'm going to focus on the education one today, and we do also have put out guidance reports for system leaders, because we know that it's a little bit harsh and a little bit unrealistic to think that only practitioners can change violence and the state of violence in this country. We really lobby government, policymakers, system leaders to think about what are some of the kind of the systems changes that they can bring in. And the box on the right, which is kind of very much tied to my role as a senior change manager, is around working with the key sectors to A, understand the evidence that we promote, but then B, to start enacting that evidence and to start trying to align practice in key sectors with what we know definitely works or has the best bet in working. So I just wanted to introduce you to a couple of national level survey findings that we conducted in 2024. And actually it's quite interesting, because I think some of the local and regional points that Nadia make really echo what we put out. So it's sometimes interesting to compare kind of the national picture to the local picture. And if I'm honest, as an organisation, we only focus on the national picture. But I think that survey that you're putting out is a really valuable tool to start to get that local picture, because there are sometimes kind of variances in the experiences of young people. But of the 10,000 teenagers that we surveyed in 2024, 20% reported having been victims of violence, which is really alarming. And in the context of a classroom, that's 1 in 5 students. And we know that violence doesn't just affect those who were victims. Those that weren't victims, 67% said that they were concerned, which I think echoes that kind of Merseyside local statistic too. It's interesting. I think increasingly young people are just unable to escape violence on their phones. We're hearing more and more from young people that may not have been directly involved in violence in their personal lives, but they're coming across it more and more on social media without looking for it. And that's creating a perception amongst young people that they need to perhaps carry a weapon to protect themselves, or that they might be a victim of violence in the near future. Those that have been victims of violence, we know a much heightened risk to experience it time and time again. 65% of those that had experienced it multiple times within a particular year, which just shows how vulnerable those are that are initially a first-time victim. And the final statistic, which I think really stood out from the survey and is particularly concerning, is around relationship violence. Half of all teenage children that we surveyed reported that if they were in a romantic relationship, they'd experienced violent or controlling behaviours. And we know that the solutions aren't just placed on the shoulders of people who work in education. I think that's indicative of just a really much wider societal issue that we all need to address across society. But I did just want to highlight it from the survey, because I think it's particularly concerning. And that has a direct impact on education, the children's experience in education. From those that we surveyed, 22% reported that violence had taken a toll on their mental health, their sleep, their appetite, and all of that just made it harder to focus in school. And it has a particular impact on attendance. Attendance within education is very much a hot topic and has been since COVID. We're seeing quite historic rates of children missing school, and 10% of the children that we surveyed had skipped school due to fears of violence. So that's having a direct impact. So all of those stats I know are kind of at a national level and are quite easy to be desensitized, but all of them represent, you know, children in our community that are really being impacted by violence. And I sometimes just make that point at the end, because I think the more I delve into numbers, the more kind of removed you are from the personal stories that violence is affecting. So I know that colleagues on the call are generally from the education sector. So for me to say that education settings are uniquely placed to keep children safe is not news to anybody. We know that they're safe, trusted spaces for young people. But although there's no lack of enthusiasm and desire to help keep children safe, where there is a gap at the moment is in the knowledge and the capacity of people working in the education sector. In a different survey that we conducted last year of over 1,000 head teachers, 51% of head teachers reported that they weren't confident in identifying and delivering evidence-based interventions for preventing children's involvement in violence. And at the practitioner level too, not just teachers, but head teachers, but teachers and DSLs, designated safeguarding leads. 82% of head teachers, 72% of DSLs reported that they had received no training on serious violence in the past 2 years. So there's quite a big gap there in the expertise just in the education sector, and we as an organisation do not place that blame on anyone. We know that the education sector is increasingly being requested to fix all of society's problems, and violence cannot feel like the most pressing kind of issue on your door when you have a million things to consider as an education practitioner, and sometimes it only becomes an issue after a serious incident has taken place in your community. So that's the context in which we published our education practice guidance report last year in May of 2024. And the report really just delved into all of the existing evidence that is out there from not only in England and Wales, but from across other Western countries such as the US, Australia, France, Germany. And it really kind of tried to synthesize what does the evidence say is the most effective in preventing children's involvement in violence, or as we in our organisation, we call them best bets. So what are the best bets with the limited resources that you have? And the report put out 5 key recommendations. So I will kind of briefly introduce you to them. They might not seem the most revolutionary or the most groundbreaking, but what they are filled with is nuance, both in how you deliver them as interventions, but also who you deliver them to. And I think that there are some things which can be delivered at whole school level, but then there are some kind of interventions and strategies that you should really be trying to target at the children we know are most vulnerable to being involved in violence. So key recommendation number 1 is centered around keeping children and young people in education. If I had to, again, the report is probably 30, 40 pages, but within this section, if I were to split it, and as simply as I could, I would split it into 3 kind of key recommendations under this section. Delivering evidence-informed attendance improvement strategies, implementing whole school and targeted behaviour support to reduce the need for exclusion. And the third section, which increasingly, as we've worked with more schools in the last year, is being shown to us to be perhaps the weakest area among schools across England and Wales, is the support that's been provided for temporarily suspended and permanently excluded children. So that's recommendation number 1. The report also sets out recommendation number 2, which is around providing trusted adults. There are some schools that are able to provide mentoring. There are others that aren't, due to just resource and capacity. But we really know that this is considered a really effective strategy to improving the attendance of children in school, but also just to improve their general engagement across their education experience. So we really recommend providing one-to-one mentoring by trained adults. And there's a range of different ways that you can do that. In the report, we specifically touch on sports as a possible avenue to doing that. That can be a really effective way to not only reach those harder to reach students, but also to keep them in school, perhaps in after school clubs, which are a particularly vulnerable time of the day for children. And I'll touch on that on key recommendation number 4. Key recommendation number 3 is around developing social and emotional skills. So when we've surveyed children that have perpetrated violence, 7 out of 10 have admitted to doing so as a result of being provoked, either in person or online through social media. So we know that we really need to develop the social and emotional skills of young people to be able to handle conflict, to be able to handle being provoked, and just to really just be able to regulate their emotions. Across this section of the report, we kind of recommend a range of different measures, from a universal curriculum to very targeted support that could include one-to-one sessions, or perhaps in a smaller group dynamic. There is a specific section around relationship violence reduction, which I think really just ties into that's the statistic that I mentioned earlier, around half of children experiencing violent or controlling behaviours in a romantic relationship. And as we started to survey the education sector across England, this is perhaps a particularly weak area or an area that needs development from across schools. There are very few schools that are providing robust training to the staff that do deliver violence reduction sessions to their secondary age children. And there are a range of other kind of strategies involved in the report, such as anti-bullying, and how to support access to therapy through a kind of multi-agency approach. Key recommendation number 4 in the report is centered around targeting efforts at the places and times where violence occurs. The data is very clear that children are at a much heightened risk of being involved in violence from across Monday to Friday, and at 4 to 6 p.m. in the school week. For your local context, that might be a particular area where there are different bus routes that kind of cross over with each other, perhaps bus stops. It could be outside schools. It could be in the town centre or city centre. But we really recommend that education settings are consistently surveying not only children but staff as well, to determine where to focus your efforts. And once you have that intel, working with parents and also just across a range of kind of different multi-agency organisations in your local context to ensure that your response is as coordinated as possible. And the final key recommendation is slightly more controversial, and I'll probably just try my best to explain it in a succinct manner. But we're just aware that within the education sector, resources are so limited, and that perhaps when there is an incident in your local area, there is sometimes a big push to do something, and often that might be knife awareness programs that are brought into school or prison awareness programs. We do just urge schools and education settings to just cautiously consider strategies that we as an organisation just don't currently have robust evidence to say definitely work to prevent children becoming involved in violence. So one example of that I mentioned is knife awareness programs. At the moment, there's just no available evidence and robust kind of research that has gone into really understanding if this is having the desired effect of preventing children becoming involved in violence. We've heard really positive examples from schools across England and Wales at a kind of anecdotal level, but similarly we've heard quite concerning examples where assemblies are kind of put out across schools to scare students, and students are leaving perhaps more scared of walking around in their local community with the fear that actually every other young person is carrying a knife and that they need to carry a knife to protect themselves. We know that sometimes, as I mentioned, if there has been an incident in your local area and there's a lot of pressure from the media, from parents, from the local community to put them on, you will do so. And we would never say definitely don't do them. We would, but we would just veer you to be as cautious as possible. And in the report, we do have some do's and don'ts around how to effectively deliver that. Another area which is slightly more controversial that we include in the cautiously consider unproven strategies is just trauma-informed practice training. I think the evidence is very clear that trauma-informed practice training is really effective to help teachers to build positive relationships with their students, to better manage behaviour in the classroom by just understanding what might be happening outside of the classroom. We just have heard of examples of schools hoping that specifically trauma-informed practice training will lead to a reduction in involvement in violence of their students. And where resources are so limited, if that is the stated goal of putting that training on, we do just recommend focusing on key recommendations 1 to 4. But we would never as an organisation say that it's a harmful approach. We know that there are kind of secondary consequences or other intended outcomes of that training being really positive for the school settings. And then one area that we do just urge education settings to perhaps avoid is around prison awareness programs. There are specific kind of studies and randomized control trials that have been conducted across England and Wales that, and also the US, that have shown that these can be quite harmful to children, and that can take place in different contexts. It could be having children attend prisons to see what prison is like, or it could be having an ex-prisoner attend a school and deliver an assembly on their experiences in prison. So again, we just urge you to approach these quite cautiously, and if you want more information on how to deliver them, we've included a couple of points around that in our report. I'd like now to move on to introducing you to a self-assessment tool where you can perhaps reflect on the practice in your setting. But I did just maybe want to introduced a 30 to 60 second just period of reflection. If you have any reflections that you want to share in the chat, please do. Unfortunately, just because of the time, I don't think we've got the opportunity to talk about it as a group. But I wanted to pose two questions to you. What surprised you or intrigued you about the 5 key recommendations? And then the second question would be, do any of the recommendations make you think about practice in your local context? And that can be good practice or bad practice. So I will stop talking for 60 seconds, and then I can introduce you to our online tool. But if you did want to share any reflections in the chat, please do so, because I know that there are some really knowledgeable kind of colleagues on the call who have very specific knowledge of what's happening across the Merseyside region.